Welcome again, everyone. Hopefully you're having a good time at the summit. We have another awesome speaker coming up, Nikki Chapple, talking about building a Teams creation workflow using Power Automate. Welcome, Nikki.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. And let's start off the presentation. So first of all, we have to thank all of our sponsors. So without all of these sponsors here on the screen, community events like these won't be possible for us to share kind of our knowledge within the wider Microsoft 365 community. So we thank them all today. So hopefully you're at the right session. It's all about building a Teams creation workflow using Power Automate. So before we go in, just a little bit about me. So I'm Nikki Chapple. I'm based in the UK. I'm a principal cloud architect for a company called Cloudway. It's a Microsoft 365 consultancy organization, and I'm specialized really in Microsoft 365 and Teams governance and compliance. So it's really that balancing act with trying to ensure that you've kind of got really good user productivity, but making sure that things are governed and in an effective and a secure manner. I've got my website, nikkichapple.com. If you go onto there, you will actually see the blog about this because I'm going to go and demonstrate the flow. It can be quite difficult to keep up. You can have all of the information in my blog post there. I also post a lot of useful information on Twitter and LinkedIn. I've got many certifications, as you can see on the screen, with Microsoft 365, but it's also broader than that. I'm an enterprise architect and a business change manager because it's really key, I think, to be that kind of glue between the business and IT. It's pulling all of those bits of information in from all the different sides to make sure that what we build is efficient and effective. So the question is, why not just use the standard Microsoft Teams creation process? It is very easy to do. It's enabled out of the box, but in some respects, it's too lax. It's too flexible. Because you can allow any user in your organization to create a team, you've got some limitations. There's no naming standard because you can just type any name that you like. Really key point, and some people are not aware of it. It allows you to create duplicate teams. So unlike if you're trying to create a SharePoint site or an Outlook email address where it says, sorry, that SharePoint URL is already taken, or that email address is already taken. It doesn't do that. It just allows you to create another team. So you might have a team called marketing, and they're based in the UK, and there might be another marketing team based in Canada. They want to say create a team for their marketing department. Very easy just to go in and create another team. The display name will say marketing. So you'll end up with two teams, both with the same name. Behind the scenes, it will have a different URL. It'll put some numbers after it, and it will have a different Outlook mailbox behind the scenes as well. It'll be called marketing with some numbers after it. So for me, that's one of the really key things, particularly when you've got kind of a dispersed organization across several sites and potentially several countries as well. You may have multiple departments with similar sounding names. Another big thing I find is you're only required to enter one owner in a team. A team needs to be governed, it needs to be managed, and that's the owner's responsibility, particularly when you've got a private team. Because with a private team, membership is governed by the owner. So somebody can request to join the team, but ultimately it's down to that owner to say, yes, you can join, or no, you can't. So if that one owner leaves the organization, then you end up with an ownerless team. So it becomes ungoverned. So it's good practice to kind of say, well, always have at least two owners, but there's nothing to enforce that process either with the standard Teams creation process. So you've got no naming standards that you want to enforce. You can't ensure that you've got multiple owners. And also for some organizations, you may want to have an approval process that somebody recommends that they would like to have a team, and somebody checks to say, actually, there's already a team in place. Why not add another channel to it? Or apply some form of a naming convention, or even if it's just a case of going through to your manager first. So there's some of the limitations. I mean, what you can do really out of the box is you've got this capability to say, well, actually, I don't want everyone in the organization to create a team. I can just have maybe people in IT to do it, or a kind of a nominated group of people. So you can control who can create teams, but there's nothing to actually ensure these other processes. So it can cause over time, a lot of problems with team sprawl, ownerless teams, duplicate processes. I mean, one particular instance in the UK, it was working with a UK university. They had a kind of the office processes were being managed in Teams, but also the students were using Teams for their academic studies. And it was in the finance department, they were working on the pay rises for the academic staff. They wanted to post the spreadsheet of information into a particular team. Unfortunately, they picked the wrong finance team. It was a finance team to do with students. Therefore, sensitive data about people's pay rises were posted in an open forum that was accessible for the wrong audience. So it is important that we make sure that we have processes and we can govern and control our teams effectively. So what can we do about it? Well, I'm going to show you today that how you can use out-of-the-box products that we've got within Microsoft 365 to help govern this. So we're going to be using three things, really, that everybody's got within Microsoft 365. So we're going to use a form to capture some information. So that's a data entry form. So you can ask there to say, give me 2 owners, give me 3 owners. You can collect additional data about your team, additional justifications, and other information that you may find relevant. That information needs to be stored somewhere. So we're going to store it in a list. So that will give you then kind of like this archive and this record of all of the information that's being captured. The good thing about this list is that once you've got that in place, you can use that for like ongoing life cycle management. So to try and find out, are these teams still needed later on in the process? So you've got that record. And then we're going to use the power of Power Automate to actually then go through and create the teams with the relevant governance. So we'll look at how we can manage duplication checks to make sure that we don't create a team with the same name as another team. We can put approval processes in there. We can create the teams. We can even add the sensitivity labels that you might have to control guest access, for example. And then once this process is done, it's communicated out to the people that's requested it, and the list is updated. So that's what I'll be showing you now. So there are some considerations that we need to think about. Is one, we're using standard Power Automate. So we don't need any kind of additional licenses, because some things within Power Automate are premium features. This is not premium. Now we're going to be using a preview feature for creation using some HTTP and Graph API. It is in preview at the moment, but it's not showing as a premium connector like some of the other HTTP features are. So that's important to know. When you implement this, you'll need to think about things for kind of standard team creation. If you leave that standard team creation open to everybody else, then people can bypass this whole process and still click that button at the bottom left-hand corner of Teams to say create a team. So you will need to restrict down that team's creation to a specific group of users. And when you're using the flow in the back end, best practices is to use it within a service account rather than an end user account, because if that end user leaves the organization, the flow will break. And also make sure you add those appropriate permissions. That service account will need to be in that team, that Microsoft 365 groups creation. Otherwise, the flow won't be able to create those groups. So best thing to do with this is jump straight in with the demos. So let's have a look and see how this process works. So I'm in Teams. Everybody's familiar with Teams, and I'm going in as an end user that wants to create Teams. Now, what I've done here is I've actually created an app, and I've actually pinned it on my navigation bar. You could add it as a tab, etc. But I've got it here, and I've got it pushed out to everybody in the organization. So I've got my Teams creation. And all that's doing is that's going to load up a form that I've created. So let's just walk through what I've captured on this form, and then I'll show you filling it in, showing you how the flow will work, and then we can go through the actual flow steps. So with the form, I'm just capturing information. So some information you must have. So with the team, you always have a team name and a team description. So in this case, I'm going to call it Nikki Test 1. Could add my description text in. That's the standard description that you get with the team. The privacy of the team, that's standard as well. So your public, private. So I'll have a private. Now, I'm starting now to start capturing some other attributes that I want. I want to distinguish between a long-term operational team, say for a team for HR or finance or IT, or a project-based team that might last for 3 months or 6 months. So I'm getting the user to select. It's a field here. Now, depending on what I select here, is actually going to form part of my naming convention. So if I select project, it's going to put in the words PROJ dash in front of my team name. And if I select operational, it's going to be OP dash. Then we've got the team sensitivity. So if you're using sensitivity labels within Microsoft 365 for your containers, and I recommend that everybody does, because this can control whether guests have access down to your teams, down to an individual team level. Without sensitivity labels, if you've got guest access enabled, guests could be added to any team. So this allows an extra bit of granularity. I'm also capturing some information that the Power Automate processes doesn't actually need, but I'm capturing it on the form here. Team duration. So how long is that team needed for? The useful thing with this is if it's on the list, you can then go and check later on and say, actually, is that team still needed? I'm adding in now a second owner. Best practice there. And if you wanted maybe some further other justification or other information, you can obviously just keep adding extra boxes to this field, whatever important information you need to justify this. So just before I do that, so let's just quickly go back to my team. So here's some examples we can see here at the top. I had a project-based team, so that was called project. But actually my naming standard's a little bit more complex. So I've got, is it a project or an operational team at the beginning? Then we're going to have the team name that the user has selected. And then afterwards, I am adding the country of the user. So in Azure AD, with the part of the user's profile, you've got the option to collect and store their country, or it could be their department. You can use those attributes and actually populate that. So my team name for the purposes of this demonstration is just showing you can add information at the beginning, add information at the end, and you can create a standard for your team names rather than just having kind of free-form name structures. So if we go back to the form. So I'm going to call a team called Nikki Test 1. So what it's actually going to do, if I select a type of project, it would put proj behind. And because this lady that I'm in, Adele, she's based in Germany, it will put Germany behind. Now, the reason I'm doing this is actually I want to show you that I've already got a team called that. So let's go back quickly and look at our team. That team already exists. So I'm going to ask for a team called Nikki Test 1. Type of project, so it's going to put project in the front. Adele lives in Germany, so a Germany is an attribute. So I'm going to show you how this will kind of block it and that she'll get a message back. So let's test this out. So we've got description, private, project, internal, duration, and I need a second person. So bear with me while I copy the email address in. And then you can add justification, whatever else you want to capture. So that's sending a form and it's gone. So this is where the Power Automate kicks in. So if I refresh this quickly, that has already processed. So see, it's succeeded. So if I go quickly back to this user, you will see a message has come through. Power Automate has gone through, checked that and says, actually, your team name, which you requested, Nikki Test 1, formatted name, Proj Nikki Test 1, Germany, has been rejected because it already exists in the tenant. So you're stopping that process happening. And if somebody wants to request it again, they've got the option to click there and re-request their team. So, for example, you can click on this and all it's going to do, it's going to take me to hopefully Microsoft Forms. So let's create another team. Let's call this team marketing. Have this private as well, project-based team, it's internal, a date, let's pick some date in the future. And submit. Oh, you won't let me submit because I haven't put the second person in. So because I've made these mandatory fields, you can't process until it's all in. So we're submitting that. So that's now gone through. So what will happen now is this is actually processing, and what it will do, it will ask me in a minute if I want to approve it, because I'm actually now as an administrator, I'm in the different user, and it should ask me in a second to approve and request. So I'm just using the approvals process, new team request. So I asked for a team called marketing, type of project, and I'm based in Germany. So that's my formatted name. Make that a bit bigger. And I've got a choice now of what do I want to do. So I can say agreed or whatever, and I can approve. So then my Power Automate process is going to kick in again because it was in a waiting status, and it's going to go off and provision that. So that'll take a little bit of time. So let's actually go and look at how I've created this, and then we can go through. So I was using a Microsoft form as my trigger. Now, you could have something more sophisticated and create it as an app or various other things, but forms tend to be nice and easy to use. So that was the form I've used. You just pick your form. Then the next step, your action, is you need to get the response details. So the trigger is when somebody fills in the form, get me all of that information. So all of those fields that we filled in the form, let's get those back so we can do something with. So in this process, the person who is completing the form is going to be owner number 1. So for the first owner, we need to get the profile information for that user. So it's get the flow owner. Then the next process is we need to get the requester. So the flow owner is the approver. The requester, that is the email address of the user who submitted that form. Then we need to get the email address of that second user. So the second email address, that email address we put on the form to say, I want that person to be a second owner. So we've pulled back that information. So we've got all of that useful information we can use. I set up some variables that we're going to need in the process. So I'm creating an approvers variable. And the reason that I'm doing this is I am making sure that the group of approvers isn't a single person, because you don't want to have a single person that is going through and approving this, because if that person isn't there, your process will stop. So my approvers is going to be a group or a team, and I need to create an array of all of the users or the members within the team so I can send the approval to. Then the next one is who is going to be doing the approvers. I said it was a group or a team. Now, just because for the simplicity of this process, I've gone out and found out what the unique ID of my team is. You can find that. So if I go to here, if you go to one of your teams, and if you get linked team, if you look through here at the beginning of it, it will say something like group ID. Here we go, group ID. So you pull that string of information out. That's how you find your team or your group ID. So basically, I'm saying all of the members in a particular group are going to be sent the approval. Then I'm creating a string that's going to hold that sensitivity label information. We've said, is it going to be a team that's going to be internal or an external team? Do we want guests in there? We need to know about that. So we need a variable to hold some information. And I've just put in here a link to the form. So as part of that request process, where it declined and it said that process didn't work, where is it in the chat? Where this card, it says request a new team, you need to have the URL there. So that's what that variable is storing there. So now we've kind of set everything up. What we're going to do is we're going to take that information that we've collected on the form and we're going to populate it in a list. So we're taking the information from the form, the team name, description, justification, privacy, sensitivity name, team type, the duration. When you collect information from a form, it's not in the right date to store in a SharePoint list. So what you have to do is you have to actually create an expression and format that date correctly. So you take the output, you have to do format date time, and you need to structure it correctly. The details are in my blog that tells you exactly what that formula is. We want to know the second owner who requested it and also the requester's country. So that information is going to be used to help build that team name. So then what we're doing is we're creating some more variables that we're going to use. I now need to check to see if the name is going to be used or not. Is it already being used? There's no easy way of doing through Power Automate on checking on a team name. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to check the URL for the SharePoint site behind the team to see is that unique or not. So if the SharePoint URL is already taken, I'm saying, well, you can't create a team with the same name using that URL. So I'm having to initialize some variables up front. So here you would put your domain and it would be sharepoint.com. And then depending on your configuration in the SharePoint Admin Center, you would either have it as site or team. So that's depending on your tenant. So that's the standard part of all of the URLs in your tenant. Then what I want to do is I need to check my team name and replace any spaces. So it was Nikki space teams, so Nikki space test one there. Well, if you've got any spaces or anything, well, you can't have that in a URL, so it will fail. So the process of what I'm doing here is I'm replacing any spaces. If I zoom in on here a bit, make it a bit bigger for you. So in here, it's saying it's replace a space with no space. So that's what that's doing there. So in that name, it's getting rid of any blanks. And then what it's going to be doing is it's going to be checking the site with the team name without any spaces. And it's going to check to see if the site exists or not. And when it does the check, we want to have a kind of a true or false statement coming out. So we'll create a variable that will hold that after the check. So how do we do a check to see if the SharePoint site already exists? Well, we're going to use something just called get lists. We're just going to run get lists with the proposed SharePoint site URL. You're going to get 3 potential outcomes of this. You're going to get a status 200 to say that it exists. There may not be any lists in it, but that SharePoint URL exists and you have access to it. You would get a status, an error status of 403. What 403 means is that SharePoint site exists, but you don't have permission to view it. Well, that's fine. We just want to know whether it exists or not. Whether we've got access doesn't matter. So a 403 means that site exists. We're going to reject it. So a 200 or a 300 means it exists. An error message of 404 will show that it doesn't exist. So that's what we want. If it doesn't exist, then we know it's a unique name. So what we're going to do here is we have to adapt this next step. We need to get the output of this get list. Normally, if an action fails, it will stop. And we don't want that. We want this to continue, whether it's successful or not. What we are interested in is what was the status? Was it 200, 300 and 400? So when you put this compose statement here, you'll see there's a little icon here, an eye. We have to make sure we now adapt this. We have to click on the 3 dots and select configure run after. We want this flow to continue whether it fails or whether it's successful. Normally, only is successful is ticked. We now want has failed ticked as well. So it's really important that you do that. Because we've done it's failed as well, there'll be a new status that you can pull from this get lists. It will now appear where you can get that code. So that code will have 200, 403 or 404. Because we've got that status, it's now really easy to do a switch. So that's kind of, it's either A or B or C. So as our status 200, status 403, status 404. If it's a status 200, then I want to set does the team URL exist to true. That is going to be the same for a 403. It means it exists, but I don't have access. That's true. However, if it's a 404 error, it means the URL doesn't exist. So I want to set this to false. So now I can actually do some conditions coming out afterwards to say if the site exists, go and create it and go through the approval process. If it doesn't exist, we'll push that message back to the end user. So the condition. So if the site URL does not exist, if it doesn't exist, so if it's a false, then we'll go through the creation. Let's look at if the site already exists, then we're going to be sending that rejection adaptive card that we saw. What we want to do first is we want to update the SharePoint list. So we've got a record that it has been rejected and why it was rejected. So we update these 2 fields were mandatory, so we're just repopulating those. approval status, I'm typing it. It's rejected because it's a duplicate name, and I've posted in the date time stamp of when the form was submitted, because that was the time that it was like an auto rejection, and the comments I've hard coded in. Then what I'm doing is I'm posting an adaptive card to the chat of the person that submitted the form. So it doesn't have to be an adaptive card. It could just be a chat message as well. So I've created an adaptive card and I've pulled in information. So it's saying here the requested team name with the team, the formatted team name was requested on a particular date and it's been requested, it's been rejected. So that's what that's doing. So that's your declined process because the team is duplicate. And that's what we saw here. So that's what that JSON card does. It just allows it to be nicely formatted. But if you're not familiar with that, you can just type in, choose a different action and just say send a message to a channel or a chat instead.
Hi, Nikki. There's a
Hello.
question in the chat from Mario asking, how do we deny the creation of a team in Microsoft Teams and to permit the creation to a particular group?
Okay, that has to be done in PowerShell. What I'll have to do is I'll have to I can't think what the actual PowerShell command is at the top of my head, but basically it's not Teams we're controlling. Teams is the membership of Teams is managed by Office 365 groups, so that will impact Teams, Yammer, your Office 365 groups that might be created from Planner and Power BI. So what we're doing is we're limiting that. You've got 3 options. By default, anybody in the tenant can create a group, a Yammer community or a team. You can lock it all down so only the admin users that have got access to create groups. So like a user admin or a group admin, for example. Or you can create a security group. So you would create a security group in Azure AD, and then you would add people into that security group. Then you would run a particular PowerShell command to update the kind of the structure for Microsoft 365 groups and say the team's creators, and then in there you would put your unique ID of the security group. So once that PowerShell command is set in place, you then manage the membership of who can or can't create your groups by security groups. Yeah, sorry, I haven't actually got the PowerShell command. I can look for it and I can post it in the chat afterwards.
I just did it for you, Nikki. I got it.
Oh, thank you so much.
No problem.
Was that the only question?
That was it.
Perfect. Perfect. So what we're going to look through now is that approval process that we went through. So now looking at what happens if we had that 404 message coming back when we were looking up a list within the SharePoint site to say, actually, you've entered an invalid URL. That means it doesn't exist. So that's looking good. So we can now continue our process. So what we want to do now is we're going to send an approval to a group of users. So I said before, don't send it to one person because that's just going to cause problems when that person's not there. Now, you could, if you wanted, enter in individual email addresses within the flow. But again, you've got to remember to come back. So what I'm going to be using is members of either a Microsoft 365 group or a team. And you can use an Office 365 action, which is called list group members. It's important to note when you're doing actions to do with teams, if you're doing actions regarding some of the membership and the structure, it is managed by groups. So you won't find it under the teams actions because they're team specific actions. But a lot of things to do with membership and permissions, it's wider than teams. It's teams, Yammers and the Microsoft 365 groups. They will appear under the groups. So we're going to list the group members. And that was the variable that we'd set earlier on. We'd found what the unique ID is from our team. So that's where we went in and we clicked on, get the link to the team. You can just extract out the group ID in there. So that's saying for that group ID, give me a list of members. So what it's going to pull back is a list of one or more members, because you could have multiple members in the team. So what it's going to do, it's going to go round each one of those members, and we're going to append them to a variable. And that variable is going to take their email address and a semicolon. So what we're doing is we're creating a semicolon separated list, very much as you would use, for emails and that type of thing. That's the structure. So that's what we're building up here, is an array. So it'll have one or more people in there. And that's what we're going to be using to send the approval process to. Now, within the approval process, there's a number of different ways that you can do it. So when you create an approval, I've got approve, reject, first to respond. I don't want everybody in the group to approve. I just want one person to approve, but you have got options here. You could have everyone to approve. So if you had 5 people in the group and you needed all 5 people to approve, you could select that one. But yet we only want first to respond. You put your title of your approval, who you're going to assign that approval to. So that's my list that I've sent through of the members of the group. And then I compose my message. What am I going to send to the approver? What information do they need so they can make an informed decision to say yes or no? So I'm taking in the information either from the Sharepoint list, and information, and I've just, for this purposes, you can either take it from the list or you can take it from the forms. You could also have links and various other things in here, so it can become more complex. I've just sort of kept it relatively simple, but there are more options. So that flow now will send that approval. So we saw that approval flow earlier, and it will sit there. So that flow will wait, and it'll wait up to, I think, 28 days before it times out. So, it's quite a long period before it says, actually, I'm not going to get a response back, but it's just going to go into this like hibernate state, and it's going to wait until somebody says approve or denied. So we wait for the outcome, and what we were looking for is a positive outcome. So is equal to approve. So we've got 2 options here. Let's look at the declined one first. So if it's declined, we're going to take the responses of the person that's actually declined the request. So there'll be a button, approve or decline, and a comments box. And it's going to take, if it's been declined, it's going to take the information there. And what it's going to do, we're going to populate the approver type of information. We're going to actually say their response and the date that it was completed. So we've got a history to say this has been rejected. It was rejected on this particular date, and this is the reason why. So the approver claims is the person who approved it. So one of those members of the group. So that's what we're doing, is we're going to update the list there that it's been declined. Now, we don't need to send a specific message to the end user. So it wasn't like that last process where we had to actually send an adaptive card or something in the Teams chat to the user. Because this is an approval process, the user will automatically get a response to say it's approved or declined. So let's just quickly, while I'm doing this, we can request another one very quickly. Anything in. Find another. Just copy another. Oops. So I've sent that in. So if we quickly go through here and go and wait. So a message has come through. Here's the new team request. with all of that information, I'm going to say approved, or whatever text you want to say. Use existing team, ABC, whatever it is, and I can reject it. You've also got the option to reassign. Now that's rejecting it, so that flow is waiting, and it will go through and say it's been rejected, and it's going to update the list. What we'll see here, back as that end user, we get an approval outcomes here. It's rejected. So I don't need to worry about sending a particular message back because the approval flow will do that. So we can say that it's been rejected and the information on it. So let's go back and look at the flow again. So if it's yes, we want to now create the team. So we know it's a unique SharePoint URL. We know it's been approved. So we're going to go ahead. We know it's got multiple owners as well. So there's an action called create team, nice and easy. So what we're doing here is we're taking the team name. So this is like called the final team name. I should have explained earlier. What we're doing here is we're taking bits of information, and I've created a calculated column in my list. The blog will explain a bit more details on that. But basically, it's taking elements from multiple inputs and it's concatenating it into one column to actually get that final name. It's taking the description in and privacy. So was that private or public? So that goes away and creates a team. While that team is being created, we're going to update the list to say that it's been created. And what we're going to push in here now is we're going to put in here the information from the approval. So very much like that declined, but this time it's approved. So we've got the user that approved it, the outcome, it's approved, the date that it was approved, any comments that they put in. And I'm also decided, well, let's capture that team ID and populate that in the list. That might be useful later on, just to show that you can capture other information. Then what I'm going to do is I now need to add the sensitivity labels on. So this is only relevant if you've got sensitivity labels for groups, teams and SharePoint sites. If you do have this process in place, you need to do a delay because there's back-end processes going on. If you try and run it straight away, it'll fail. So I find like a 2-minute delay works enough. Then what's going to happen is we selected a sensitivity label. I think it was internal, internee, or external, externee. They were both created in English and French, just to have the two languages. You can have whatever labels you like. Now, I can't use those labels. They're display names. When you're using processes in there, you'll actually need the IDs. So to get those IDs, you do need to run some PowerShell commands beforehand to find out what they are. So what I've had to do here, because I can't identify what those sensitivity label IDs are. You have to do that get someone to do that before you set this process up. Give you the IDs, the values. So here we are, I've created the values here. So I said if sensitivity equals the internal one, then I'm going to set my sensitivity label ID to this number. That unique ID for the sensitivity label. If I want it external, then it's going to be this value. There's no way of getting that information from Power Automate. So as I say, you will need to do it through PowerShell or Graph API to just get that information. You only need it once, then you can populate those values in your flow, and it's either or. You could have different values. You might have 3 values, but they tend just to be 2, allow guest users, block guest users. Once we've got this, now we have to use these special actions. So these are in preview at the moment, but they are within the standard set. So unlike the other HTTP commands that actually say you need to have the premium connector, these don't. So what it allows you to do is use some Graph API for groups. So what we're saying here is for this group with this particular team ID. So go and for this group, and patch means it's going to update. So get means it's reading, patch means it's updating. So what it's going to do is going to update this group with the label ID equals this sensitivity label that you've set up here. So once you've done that, you can now add in your owners of the team. Because what's happening here is this process will have automatically added whoever owns the flow as the owner. Well, that's not right, so we need to fix that. So what we'll do is we add the requester, the person who completed the form is going to be owner number 1. Owner number 2, that was the person that we added their email address into the team. So that's owner number 2. But we've already got the flow, the person who owns the flow, this back-end process, they would have been added as an owner by default. So at the minute, you've now got 3 owners, the person, the flow owner, the person who submitted the form, and the email address you entered in the form. So what we'll do is we'll wait for a delay. I was finding without a delay, it was there was an error. And then what we need to do is we need to remove the flow account owner. We need to remove them from the team. So again, we're using one of these Graph API commands. We're saying for this particular group with the team ID, for owners with this particular ID. So that's the details of the flow account, and we delete. So it's going to delete it. You have to then remove them as a member of the group. It's a 2-step approach. So now the process is finished. So you have created the team. We've gone through an approval process. So if we go back and look here, we go to the teams. So we asked for a project team called marketing. So that's been created. And if we have a look at manage team, Adele's, that was the person that I'm logged in at the moment. She completed the form. We put Christy in as the second owner. They're there. But I was running it under this account, so under my Nikki admin account. So I had initially been added as an owner, but at the end of the process would have removed me from the ownership. So are there any questions at all?
No, but we're out at time actually.
Yep. Okay. So just to kind of recap, using forms, we're using lists, we're using Power Automate. These are all standard functionality that you have within Microsoft 365. So I know that we're now asking if you want to scan the code. The session code is 307461. We'd love to have your feedback on this session as well. And we thank our sponsors again, and really, any questions. So there's a QR code there. Recommend you scan that in. That will take you to my blog. For those people that haven't, I will go and post it in the chat as well. So I recommend having a look through, because it will give you some of the background information on what fields you need for creating that list and getting that combined team name as well.
Great, thank you, Nikki. It was really, really good. That's awesome to see it working.
Okay.
No questions in the chat other than the one that you answered already.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me today, and have a great rest of the conference today.
Thank you. Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Cheers then.
Have a good evening.
Bye.